Welcome to the Reflections Cast, where we invite you to join us in an exploration of the teachings of our dad, Skip Ross. In each episode, we will listen to a talk or lecture from Skip, and then discuss what we might be able to apply to our daily lives and reflect on how they can inspire us to grow and change. We hope to continue his legacy and join our listeners in finding new insights and perspectives. Here's episode 7, Exchanging Truth for Lies. Well, hey everyone, this is Steve.
And this is Melody, and we're so glad to have you guys back for another episode of the Reflections Cast. We are continuing our conversation about goal setting and many things related to goal setting. It's been a really, really awesome series of episodes so far. We've really been appreciating your feedback that's been coming in with comments on Spotify and a lot of just personal reaching out to us, lots of comments from the Pioneer Circle. So we love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for all the feedback. Our last few episodes have been talking about goal setting. We've talked about the ultimate goal. We've talked about creating a plan of action. And so this episode is going to kind of continue that conversation that we've been learning from Skip. So we're really, really excited to do that. We would love to continue to invite your feedback in whatever way works best for you. So whether you want to comment on our YouTube or our Spotify channels or send us an email, it's thereflectionscast@gmail.com. So you can always reach us there, or like or comment or subscribe or however you want to interact with us. We just love hearing from you guys and love providing this content for our community.
That is right. And if you love this content and you want a whole lot more, please, guys, go to circleacamp.com/pioneers for the Pioneer Circle. That is a plethora of this exact same type of content from an awesome service. You're getting access to a goal setting app. You get weekly content, monthly coaching calls, group challenges, and just an environment of personal encouragement on your path towards applying all this stuff that we're talking about in the podcast. So if you are a fan of this kind of stuff, check it out. It really is an awesome community. It is growing every day, and we are getting feedback that people are loving what is being put out there. And if you'd like to check it out, again, please check it out at circleacamp.com/pioneers. Right, Melody?
That's right. It's been so much fun. We're loving the community that we're building, and we would absolutely love for you and your friends and your family to be a part of it. So check it out. We're going to go ahead and transition into our teaching segment from Skip. And we just wanted to give a little disclaimer before we jump into this episode. Essentially, what we're about to hear from Skip is a series of stories that he's kind of using to illustrate his point for this one. One of the stories does have some content that I think could be a little disturbing for young children. It's nothing too extreme, but it's just a graphic injury. So keep that in mind. If you've got young children listening, you may want to skip this episode with them. But for everyone else, I think these stories are going to help us to learn some really important lessons. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into our teaching from Skip.
Step number 4, and remember our 3 steps were, number 1 was to get emotionally charged, formulate decisive habits, create a plan of action, and number 4, exchange truth for lies, or what I've called the truth for lies nullification. I guess maybe the best way to illustrate that is to talk about 2 or 3 people that you may or may not be familiar with. Like most rags to riches stories, the story of Chris Gardner, H. Wayne Huizinga, Marlon Shirley, Barry Black, Ben Carson, are kind of similar in the way they started. They've all had their ups and downs. When Chris Gardner was a child, his father left. His mother remarried to a man who was anything but a father figure. Chris was chased out of the house and really had nowhere to go. He eventually found a place in the Navy. One day, Chris saw a man parking a red Ferrari. He went up to him to ask what he did for a living. The man told Chris he was a stockbroker. That's all Chris needed to hear. Now he wanted to pursue a career as a stockbroker. Chris left his job as a supplies salesman. He had little money, and his wife had left him. Chris had no job, no money, no wife, no home. But he did have his son. His son gave him immense motivation to do whatever had to be done to secure a better life. The two of them were homeless and slept wherever they could, including a bathroom at the subway station. While they were homeless, Chris studied for the licensing exam, which he passed. They were still struggling, but they had more hopes than ever before. Chris got a job at Bear Stearns in San Francisco. He made cold calls to get new clients and worked as many hours as he possibly could. As Chris worked harder, an empowering belief in him began to grow. Their situation began to get better. And in 1987, Chris was able to start his own brokerage firm called Gardner, Rich and Company in Chicago. Wayne Huizenga was born in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois, to Harry and Jean Huizenga. When Wayne was in his early teens, he, along with his father, mother, and younger sister, moved to Florida. His father, Harry, wasn't an ideal male figure. He was abusive to his wife. They were close to a divorce until they moved to Florida. The move was Harry's plan to save the marriage and start over. But Harry didn't really want to change. He still was abusive to both Jean and their children. It was tough for all of them, but Wayne didn't let this stop him. He used it as motivation to get a better life. After high school, Wayne moved back to Chicago and tried attending college, but dropped out after about a year and a half. Wayne then enlisted in the Army Reserves. After Army training, Wayne bought a truck and began to take out the garbage in Broward County. Waste management became one of the largest waste management firms in the United States. Wayne wasn't settling down, though. He wanted more. Wayne set his sights on a new industry in a small company called Blockbuster. Blockbuster grew and grew and eventually merged with Viacom for $8 billion. Through his career, Wayne has founded 3 Fortune 500 companies and has owned 3 professional sports teams. Marlon Shirley from Chula Vista, California. His mother was a prostitute. His father was a pimp. He never met his father. His mother, after he was 3 months old, got back onto the drugs that she had been on before he was born and abandoned him. He was sent from one foster home to the next, treated badly, beaten frequently. Finally, at the age of 5, he was placed in a foster home. And he was out in the front yard of that foster home one day, chasing the groundskeeper, as the groundskeeper was mowing the lawn. He slipped and fell underneath the mower. It nearly severed his right foot. They scooped him up and took him to the hospital, and the doctors managed to sew it back together. But they said to the hospital people, "Don't let him stand on that until we say he's ready. Because if he stands on that, it will break apart and we'll have to amputate." He was sedated, but the next morning he awoke. It was a new place. He had been in lots of new places. He was always afraid of being beaten and always looking for the next bite of food that he could scrap from someplace. So he woke, frightened and hungry, and jumped out of bed and landed on that foot. Collapsed to the ground. The doctors came in and said, "We cannot save it now," and they amputated his right foot. Well, he was now made the butt of jokes, foster home to foster home. Then one day, a lady found him. And she said, I'm going to buy you an artificial leg. And she did. And he learned to walk on that. He began to get around on it. And as he began to get around on it, she said, you know, you're doing well. You could do better with a updated version. So she bought him a better leg. And he began to run. And she saw him and she said, you could do better if I got you the best there is. And she did. And he began to run. And he ran and won races in his high school. And then he began to compete in the Paralympics. And Marlon Shirley retained his title as the world's fastest leg amputee when he won the 100-meter dash in a Paralympics record of 11.08 seconds, also capturing the long jump and setting a world record for his classification en route to winning silver in the 200. When Marlon Shirley was interviewed after that Olympics competition, the reporters, who suddenly now knew who he was, and they said to him, Marlon, what's the best day of your life? Thinking that he would say today. I mean, after all, the crowds know who I am. They're cheering for me. They know my name. He looked and he said, the best day of my life is the day they cut off my right foot. Because that's the day I discovered who I could be. We could talk about Barry Black, who is the chaplain of the United States Senate, a similar kind of ups and downs background in the drug culture and of New York. We could talk about Ben Carson, whose mother got married at 13. The father left. She raised 2 boys on her own. Both Barry Black's mother and Ben Carson's mother said to their children, read, 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 read. They lived in the tenement districts, and the people they ran with were people who were not headed in the right direction. And remember, we said earlier in our session tonight, that choice of associates is most critical factor in who you will become. But their close associates became the people in the books they read. Barry Black, his mother got him a record of Peter Marshall. Peter Marshall, and there were 2 sermons on that record album. And Barry Black, at 8 years of age, started listening. He listened every day, every morning, every night. He listened to those 2 sermons. He got so good, he actually knew them by heart. And one day he realized he not only knew them by heart, but he knew them with the Scottish brogue of Peter Marshall. Peter Marshall was the chaplain of the United States Senate. Barry Black recently became the chaplain of the United States Senate. We stood in his office overlooking what he says is the finest office in the Senate building, because the guy who became chaplain of the Senate after Peter Marshall, a guy from Hollywood Presbyterian Church, who spoke like a professional announcer and looked like the finest movie star in the world. He was the pastor of Hollywood Presbyterian Church. And everything had to be just so for him. And that was the office. And so every chaplain of the Senate since has enjoyed the best office in the Senate building. Ben Carson, recently has burst onto the national spotlight, and in terms of his communication, his mother said to him when he was young, read, 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 read. He used to go with his mother. She did some she was a orderly at a hospital. And he would go with her because he couldn't stay home alone. And he would sit in the waiting room. And every once in a while, he would hear a doctor being called over the loudspeaker system. Dr. So-and-so, report to emergency immediately. And he said, I used to sit there and imagine hearing my name. And he became, or is now, one of the finest pediatric brain surgeons in the world. Most people would have looked at any one of those lives in the early stages and said, impossible. So when we talk here about truth for lies nullification, that's what we're talking about.
All right. Well, we are back from Skip, and man, it's great to just have a moment where he just tells us a couple of stories, and they were some pretty awesome stories. We had some packaging that helps us qualify where exactly we are in the talk. He gives us those different steps towards conscious change: getting emotionally charged, formulate decisive habits, create an action plan, and then this step, exchanging truth for lies, or that truth for lies nullification. And he touched on some really powerful stories from Chris Gardner, Wayne Huizinga, Marlon Shirley, Barry Black, Ben Carson, just some very inspiring rags to riches sort of stories. And Melody, do you have any thoughts on this topic before we jump into some questions?
Yeah. I don't think we necessarily have a whole lot to recap on this episode because, it is mostly just the stories. But I will say I love hearing Dad tell stories because it's one of the things that he was best at. It's one of the things he was known for. And I think it's really one of the things that helped his teaching spread around the world because he knew how to engage imagination with storytelling so that people could learn the wisdom that he was teaching. And I mean, he just is one of the best people I've ever seen to do that. And people would just listen to story after story after story from Dad. So it's something that I want to keep learning and keep emulating from him because he really had a skill for it. So I loved hearing the stories in this episode. I remember him telling some of these stories throughout his teaching. One of them, the story about Barry Black, who was the chaplain of the U.S. Senate, was really cool to me because I was with him. Chris and I were with him when he and Mom and a few of our business leaders went to the Senate and actually met Barry Black. So I stood in that office that he was talking about. And I will tell you, it was one of the this guy, Barry Black, was one of the most striking humans I have ever met. Like he was so magnetic. He was so kind. And he was, sometimes you think about Washington, D.C. and I don't know about you, but I just feel very disillusioned with the whole system and all the people and just all of it. But meeting this guy and standing in that room and hearing him talk about his work as a chaplain was extremely inspiring and extremely it just gave me hope that there's still good work being done somehow, somewhere by some people, and it still matters. And so even though that was years ago, I'll never forget it because he was such a striking person. And so having that story included in this list was really cool because it's exactly what Dad is teaching. these people became something extraordinary. They really did. And I firsthand met this guy and can attest he was an extraordinary person. So that was pretty cool.
That is awesome. That is super cool. I had completely forgotten that.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. It was really awesome. So I think, the general gist of this section, this point about exchanging truth for lies, I think what I take away from it is these were individuals who had really hit rock bottom, or not even hit rock bottom. They were individuals who were born into very difficult situations. And they, against all odds, against what their friends and family might have told them was possible or realistic or wise, like they became titans in their industries, really. Very, very influential people to do extraordinary things. And so I think what Dad is saying in this exchange truth for lies conversation is they were sort of surrounded by the lies that they could not achieve anything great, that they were destined for, a low level of living and being. And they chose to surround themselves with people, with resources, and with belief that indeed these things were possible. And because they chose to surround themselves with the truth that it was possible, it indeed was possible. And so I love hearing stories like this. It's very inspiring, very motivating, and just really cool addition to our goal setting conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. I mean, there is so much to discuss. So do you want to get into the questions so we can
let's do it.
Break some more of this down? All right. So question number 1 is the belief in achieving success against all odds simply a matter of ignoring reality, or does it require more? Does it require a specific type of mindset, or are there certain qualities that these guys had that made it easier for them to believe in this against all odds?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think ignoring reality is an interesting way to put it, because essentially reality should be truth, right? But what Dad is saying is we're replacing lies for truth. And so I don't think it's a matter of ignoring reality. I don't think that they were ignoring the challenges that they were facing or the difficulties that they were living in. I think they were choosing to believe that those challenges weren't the final say in their story.
It's a very interesting discussion to have at this point in time, where truth is such a difficult concept to nail down. What is true for some isn't true for all. And what he's really saying here is like they denied what the truth was of their reality for the truth that they perceived for themselves. So they're replacing the truth that some people might see for the truth that they saw.
Yep. No, I think that's a very interesting point. Having this conversation, living in what many experts are calling a post-truth era, meaning truth is just really up for debate in pretty much every category. Things that would have seemed like clear reality not too long ago. So that is a very interesting conversation. And I think partially what you're saying is right. There would have been people who would have told Marlon Shirley, who is the amputee, like, hey, the truth is that you've lost your foot and you can't run races. Like that would have been the truth that they would have seen. But I think what Dad is saying is that's a lie. I think that you can't thing is kind of a lie to Dad, at least. It's not necessarily usually a matter of can't. It's a matter of, what's wise, what you're willing to sacrifice, what you're willing to learn, how you're willing to grow. But can't isn't necessarily something that Dad would recommend be in the vocabulary for a whole lot of things. So I think that's a really interesting conversation. My take on this would be that these people had to actually own their reality. I think that it wasn't that they were disregarding it. I think they used their circumstances to motivate them to do something extraordinary. Chris Gardner, he's homeless, raising a toddler. And you can either roll over and give up, or you can use that circumstance and do something extraordinary. Same thing with, all of these guys. So I think that it's not a matter of ignoring the reality. I actually think it's a matter of embracing the reality, but then mining for the deeper truths in who am I created to be? What am I created to become? What am I capable of becoming in this situation? And so, it requires that. I think it requires mining reality for the deeper truths about who we are and what our purpose is in the world.
Absolutely. And Chris Gardner, if that name sounds familiar to anybody, that is the man that Pursuit of Happiness movie is based on. So if you really want to delve even further into his story, you can check that out. It's a very inspiring film. Okay, so question number 2 then. Are these, I guess building off of your previous response, but are these people just kind of crazy? Have they developed, traits and qualities that are more conducive to going from that rags to riches? Or can anybody just develop these qualities through, determination and effort? Is this exclusive to the crazies, or is it something anybody can if they have the willpower to do so?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've talked before here about the crazy ones who change the world. I think there is a level of, I don't know that I would use the word crazy, but a level of determination, I guess, and willing to, a spirit that's willing to fight through hard things again and again and again. I do think there does have to be a degree of that you either have or that you develop. And I think that is something that you can develop. I don't think you have to be born with that indomitable spirit, but I do think it does take that to do these extraordinary things, whether you're born with it or you develop.
Yeah. That is such a better verbiage, an indomitable spirit, than they're just crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's essentially we're saying the same thing, but, Dad and his words, gotta have the right words. But I think for some of these things, some of these stories, there is some natural inherent gifting that a person likely has to have to become a neurosurgeon. Like there has to be a level of intelligence. Or even, a stockbroker to found your own brokerage. I think there has to be a level of intelligence there. But there's other stories here that, not to say some of these others weren't as intelligent, but there's different giftings. The Marlon Shirley, who won the record for the 100-meter, it was the 100-meter dash, I think.
100-meter and I think 200-meter too as well.
Yeah. Like that's an athletic prowess that sure you can, you must work hard every day to make world records. But I do think you're also born with a certain athletic skill or, propensity that probably, helped him go in that direction. So here's what I think. I don't think anybody can live the story of someone else. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I could say today, I'm going to be Barry Black and I'm going to live that story. And I could decide right now that I'm going to accomplish everything that he accomplished and be the chaplain in that office in the Senate. But there's something in me that's extraordinary that I could do. And so I don't think it's about, you hear these stories and you decide, I'm going to do that exact thing that person did and become a neurosurgeon and run for president. But there's something that hearing that story ignites in you that is something that you're gifted at, that is something that you were born with, that you could cultivate, that you could do something extraordinary with, that could be good and beautiful in the world. So that, plus the indomitable spirit that is, partially born and partially developed, I think probably are what I would say are maybe the traits and qualities that would a person would need to do these extraordinary things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I like that you're expanding out that definition as well, that this doesn't have to be applied specifically to going from a rags to riches. It can be inspiring change in your community and bringing light to injustice, or, something that requires a lot of effort and a lot of determination and a lot of willpower to make a change happen. And it doesn't necessarily just need to be, in your own personal financial struggle or whatever. It can be in all sorts of aspects of life. So I love that. Okay. So, I don't mean to rush through all these questions, but sometimes you have short episodes and that's all right. Because we had some really cool stories and some time with Skip, and then, next episode will probably be a longer one. But for question number 3, what are some practical ways that we can exchange truth for lies? What are some resources that people can use? What is it that they surround themselves with? Like for me, I know that making something like this podcast, putting this positivity out there, putting this encouragement out there, putting these discussions out there is, that is our method of giving people resources to maintain this kind of mindset, to maintain this determination, whatever you guys are going through. And so I think that this is kind of what I'm talking about when I say what are some resources, but is there other things that people should be doing when trying to find those different ways of attaining this?
Yeah, I think that the stories he tells here give us a couple practical ways, because in each of these stories, there is either a person that comes along that believes in these people, or there is a choice for these people to just kind of delve deeply into reading. So I think that those are some of the ways that Dad is suggesting that we kind of replace the lies with truth. Specifically, and I've found both of those things to be extremely powerful in my own life. When you are around a person who believes in you, who sees the best in you, who kind of speaks about you in ways that are even greater than you see yourself, it does, invite you to rise to that challenge. It does inspire you. It does help you believe in things that you may not have believed were possible. So I think that is a huge way, is just to be very, very conscious of the people that we surround ourselves with, and also to spend less time around people who don't see those things, because I've experienced that in my own life in pretty surprising ways. Like I've always heard Dad talk about, being around people who encourage you and see the best in you, et cetera, et cetera. And I've heard him share about stories from his past where he had to kind of part company with people because they were just going a different direction in life than he was, and things of that nature. But having experienced it in my life, I realized how right he was about those things, and how extremely impactful it is to have people who kind of want to keep you at their level of engagement with the world and their level of success, I guess you could say, and how strongly it influences you. So I would say both being aware of the right influences that we choose to surround ourselves with, and being aware of, protecting ourselves from too much involvement with influences that are going to kind of keep us in our comfort zones, I would say. And then reading, for sure, I think is a huge way that has always been a consistent practice of successful people, or people who have done great things in the world. Many, many, many of them are readers. So I think that's a huge way. I think in addition to those ways that kind of come alive in these stories, like you said, podcasts and other sorts of even bite-sized material that we choose to feed ourselves every day, I think makes a really huge difference. So, and again, it's both the accentuating the positive and eliminating the negative. Like it's both listening to podcasts like this that help us believe the best about ourselves in the world, and listening to less of the news media that makes us believe the worst about ourselves in the world. So, or that's just an example. But what I'm saying is, I think there's a lot of lies that we are surrounded with all day, every day. And I think the more that we can surround ourselves with any sort of content that is geared towards truth and beauty and goodness, will certainly help us make that exchange. So that's my quick answer, I think.
I love that. And I think, it was interesting that Dad, in this context, gave credit to some of the moms as saying, read. But I definitely know that is something that he has said his whole life as well. And I've heard it from other speakers as well. But read. Definitely, as he said it, it was something that I've heard my entire life from him. And I think that is a hallmark of maintaining that mindset, maintaining that critical state to, improve your situation and accomplish your goal.
Yep. I could say, just as a quick recommendation, because I will say I've been getting a lot of feedback from several of you who have been enjoying the book recommendations that we've been able to share on the podcast. So I will do my best to keep doing that as we go along. So one book recommendation, obviously we're saying read anything good and true and beautiful, but there's one book that speaks directly to this point, and it's called The Wisdom Pyramid by Brett McCracken. I just finished it. It's a new book, and it was a really good read. It is a faith-based book, but a really good read, kind of taking the idea of the food pyramid, which obviously we all know has some flaws, but the general idea of the food pyramid was eat more of the healthier foods, eat less of the fatty and sugary foods, right? And so this wisdom pyramid is essentially saying, hey, we're not going to probably get rid of all technology and social media and movies and all the things in our lives, but what if we kind of built our wisdom intake in the same way we build our food intake, so that we're taking in more of the more healthy sources and less of the less healthy sources. So it was just a great little read that had a lot of good practical advice. So The Wisdom Pyramid, Brett McCracken.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Wisdom Pyramid. Very cool. All right. Well, we will definitely have a link to that on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check it out, guys. All right. Well, thank you, Melody. I know that the skip content, I guess it was a little thin on bullet points, but certainly a powerful topic to discuss nonetheless. So thank you for fleshing it out and answering my questions and giving a little bit more context and clarity. It's always awesome to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for putting it together. And hopefully it has been encouraging and inspiring to our listeners. I know it has been to me. So thank you guys for joining us on this journey with the Reflections Cast. Remember that your support means everything. So if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to hit that like button, write us a review, or leave us a voicemail. And please share this episode with friends, family, or anyone you think might benefit from our discussions. We're committed to helping you thrive on your journey of discovering all you were created to be. Until next time, keep reflecting, keep growing, and pass it on.